Welcome to Soccer 101, the podcast where we endeavour to tell you everything you need to know about the beautiful game and some of the stuff you don't. My name is Ryan Bailey, and joining me today we have the bros with the nose, the mans with the plans, and the chancers with the answers, starting off with Taylor Rockwell.
Hello, that was a rhyming introduction that I definitely approve of. Thank you for that, my friend.
You're very welcome. Also here, Mr. Joseph Lowery. Hello, Joe.
Hello, Ryan.
And Graham Ruthven rounding out the pack. Hey, G-Unit.
Hello, I'm definitely a chancer. Not sure I've got many answers, but we'll see how it goes.
We will soon find out, Graham. We'll soon find out. The topic today is timely. Today, we're going to answer the question, what does a soccer player do between seasons? This being timely, of course, for the European seasons, where most of them, except for local ones to Graham, haven't started yet at the time we are recording. So we're trying to find out, do players actually have downtime in an era when soccer never sleeps, like New York, the city they named after a place in England? It's so good. That's my understanding. How long do players get off? What do they do in pre-season? What does it actually do when they're off? And which Mediterranean destination are they all on yachts at? There's lots of questions to be answered here, Tay-Tay. Why don't we start off by sort of tackling how long a modern soccer player actually gets off, because many of these players in top divisions are playing 60 or 70 games in a season. They need themselves a break. What's your understanding of how much of a break they actually get?
Mykonos. Sorry, I answered the wrong question. I answered the one about where they go in the Mediterranean. My understanding is that they are supposed to contractually get 4 weeks off, and maybe that gets sort of spread out over the season, because for some players, they get 1 week off. But it's anywhere from 1 week to 4 weeks for most leagues. I think for other ones, like, say, Major League Soccer, it's a little bit longer, but that seems to be the norm, is 1 to 4 weeks.
Yeah, that seems to be the range that we're looking at here. European contracts, by the way, tend to start on July 1st. They expire on June 30th. So that gives you an idea of when employment changes for players who are changing from club to club. But the amount of breaks that players get can even vary between teams because of things like summer tournaments. For example, we've had the Olympics and players returning late to their respective squads for that. Late returns for Euro 2020 and for the Copa America and for Gold Cup and so on and so forth. Harry Kane, for example, who made the news this week as we're recording on Monday, August 2nd, for not reporting back to training for one reason or another. That was almost exactly 3 weeks after the Euro 2020 final. Leo Messi, as we recalled, also hasn't reported back for Barcelona training where he was expected to be. And if you look at maybe we should also talk about when the pre-seasons start, so you can get an idea of the sort of window that players are getting off. If we're going to use the European example of seasons finishing in mid-May, the earliest pre-season friendlies for Premier League teams this season were on the 17th of July. Arsenal and a bunch of other Premier League teams had pre-season friendlies on the 17th of July. It doesn't mean that every player is expected to report for them, but that's sort of the dates we're looking at. And if you look at MLS, I looked at, I think it's the upcoming season here. Pre-season players were expected to report on March 8th for an April 17th start date. But Joe, I think my understanding there is that there'll be training camps prior to that as well, and you can get those starting in sort of mid-January when an MLS player is expected to be back, and maybe a bit earlier if your team is in CONCACAF Champions League. Does that match up with your findings, Joe?
Yeah, it's always so early to me. In this whole concept of what do players do over the offseason, what's going on, it just helped me realize the level of athletes that we talk about. Like, they play 60, 70 games, like you're saying, Ryan. Some players play fewer games than that because they're not involved in as many international games, or maybe they're not quite at that level. But man, these guys and these women are playing so much. And maybe at times they're playing even too much. Looking into this question, researching this topic, I came across a study from FIFPro, F-I-F-P-R-O, which is the representative organization of tens of thousands of professional soccer players all over the world. They had a study come out in 2019 called At the Limit. And essentially the research in this study found that the majority of elite players on average had less than the recommended rest time between games, the medically recommended rest time between games, because of the amount of fixtures that they're playing. They also figured out that the lack of recovery associated, this is obvious, but the lack of recovery that players have decreases performance and increases likelihood of injury. I mean, players, it really does feel like are playing so much, probably too much, and the fact that they can still come out even with 1 to 4 to 5, 6 weeks off. The fact that they can still come in and perform at the level they do is just so impressive to me.
Graham, as we record in the first week of August, Scotland have already come back to their league play. We can talk about Celtic or not, that's up to you. But and EFL action is back this coming weekend as we record. The Community Shield is coming up as well. I think Liga actually starts this weekend too. Are Scottish players getting less break than normal in this season?
It's been this way for a while because now our Scottish clubs are also playing European qualifiers at an earlier time. So it used to be Scottish clubs would go directly into European competition, and now they've got qualifiers. So Celtic have already played two rounds of European qualifiers.
How'd that go?
It didn't go well for them. They were as effective in dropping out of Europe as Britain was in a certain vote a few years ago. But yeah, so they're not getting much time at all, and it's difficult to answer the question of when pre-season starts because it's different for all clubs and all leagues, and even for players at the same clubs. So Manchester United, even looking at Premier League clubs, Manchester United have been in pre-season for a number of weeks. They've played pre-season friendlies, and yet they've got a number of players. I think Paul Pogba this week has only just returned to training. I saw a number of players, I think yesterday, reporting for training. Harry Maguire was probably one of them, the England players that were involved in the Euros. So it's all very different schedules, and we can all laugh about how players spend all their time in Miami or getting arrested in Mykonos, or how they spend all their time seemingly in the off-season in Salt Bay restaurants. I think their footballers are keeping Salt Bay restaurants alive. It's like Hard Rock cafes to them. You don't ever see anyone else at Salt Bay restaurants but Premier League footballers. But we can joke about all that, but that downtime it performs such an important role in a player's athletic well-being, which is what Joe was referring to there. And without that recovery time, they can't perform at the top level, at least not indefinitely. And that's why I get really concerned about a player like Pedri, an 18-year-old who's just played his first top-level season with Barcelona. His season hasn't ended yet. Barcelona are playing pre-season friendlies right now, and he's got the Olympic final against Brazil with Spain. And I just think that it's such a risk that players can be run into the ground because, as I say, that off-season, that downtime is so important to performing at their ability to perform at the elite level. And it just seems like in the modern game, with new competitions and fixtures being added, that recovery time is sparser than ever.
That's really tragic for Salt Bay that Pedri isn't contributing to the Salt Bay-based economy as well.
Yeah, absolutely right. That Barcelona wage is not going to a Salt Bay restaurant right now.
Do they still get wages in Barcelona, by the way?
Good question.
Sorry, Taylor.
Oh, no, it's fine. I was just wanting to make fun of Salt Bay. Instead, I'll ask this. Graham, we're recording this on August 4th, 2021. Did you say the SPL season has begun? Yeah,
that's right. It started at the weekend.
So we've had one game?
That's correct.
And how many Old Firm derbies have there been? I'm assuming 3 or 4.
So they fit in a couple on Saturday and then one on Sunday night, just for good measure.
Perfect. And it's interesting when we talk about the kind of lack of time that these players are given and how coaches are even seeking to diminish that a little bit, because I believe there is a theory / sort of accepted truth, which is that when Major League Soccer pushed back their schedule and made it last a little bit longer and made more home and away fixtures for playoff, that was intended to extend the season because a then national team coach did not love how much of an offseason there was, and so he wanted things to be maybe shorter, and that's why we had an MLS Cup final in December in freezing conditions.
Oh, yeah. That was living. By the way, speaking of MLS, I've taken the courtesy of contacting an MLS player for his perspective on this question that we're facing here about players having time off between seasons. The player is Brandt Bronico, who played for 3 seasons with the Chicago Fire. He's now with the world's greatest club, Charlotte FC. So I shot him a few of these sort of questions around this, and the first one I asked him was, how long do MLS players get off? And I wanted to get the answer straight from the horse's mouth. Brandt said, depending on if you qualify for playoffs or not, we usually get 1 to 2 months off during off-season. If you make it all the way to MLS Cup, it's around 1 month off, and if you don't qualify for playoffs, teams have the option to require you to train until Thanksgiving, and then you're off till around mid-January. So there's a bit of perspective on the MLS way of doing things. Gents, we should talk about what exactly happens during the off-season. Do players sort of go like NFL players and go and just eat Bojangles for several months, or do they actually work out? Why don't we tackle all that after a very short break in which we're going to talk about ExpressVPN. Coming up right now. Here it is. Taylor, I need a secure, encrypted tunnel between my digital device and the internet so my online activity can't be seen by anyone else. Have you got any ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I think get a couple really good tunneling crews. You could dig those tunnels. You could connect them all over the place. That seems like it's going to require a lot of infrastructure. Elon Musk still hasn't done his car tunnel under LA. So I think if we're using that one to scale, you're going to be in for a process, Ryan. So maybe, just maybe, the best way to go is with ExpressVPN.
ExpressVPN, it's a VPN service, Taylor. It's not just a VPN service, it's my favorite VPN service. To be clear, using the internet without ExpressVPN, it's a bit like going to the bathroom and not closing the door. You're leaving yourself vulnerable, Tay-Tay. Did you know that ISPs, internet service providers, I was talking acronyms, I'm fancy, they can sell information to ad companies and tech giants who can use your data to target you. If you go anonymous with a VPN, they can't do that. And one of the best things about a VPN, the thing I use it for most, is you can fool your device into thinking you're in a different country. For example, I'm in a different country right now, Taylor. I'm in the United Kingdom. I am indeed. And you didn't even know it because I fooled you as well.
I didn't.
I fooled my computer as well, because using ExpressVPN thinks I'm in one of several US locations that I can tap into straight away. And I don't just do that just to fool people and for subterfuge reasons, Tay-Tay.
You're not just a spy? That's good to know.
Well, don't say it out loud. I mean, you've given the game away, but thanks very much.
My mistake,
but I also use it to watch my HBO Max, my Hulu, my Fubo. I can use them all outside of the United States with a VPN.
Which would be, for you moving from a place where you have all these subscriptions and easy access to them, I have heard many people complain about the lack of access and easy access to a lot of the games in the Premier League and elsewhere. So I'm glad that you still have that. But Ryan, I assume it's limited only to your laptop and nothing else.
That's where you're wrong. It works on phones, laptops, even routers, so everyone who can share your Wi-Fi can be protected, Tay-Tay. ExpressVPN creates a secure encrypted tunnel, as we've mentioned, between your devices and the internet, and it can make you your online activity go a little bit more anonymous, and it can hide your location. Close that bathroom door. That's all I say, Tay-Tay. Close that bathroom door. And I think we're giving an opportunity to listeners to help them close that door a little bit.
We are indeed. Close that door and instead secure your online activity by visiting expressvpn.com/soccer today. That's expressvpn.com/soccer. DOT, you don't have to spell that out. You can just put the period, and then you do have to spell out COM for com/soccer, and you can get an extra 3 months free. expressvpn.com/soccer.
Thank you very much to ExpressVPN for sponsoring this episode of Soccer 101 and for letting me watch HBO Max. Bye! Welcome back to Soccer 101. Taylor, I'm coming to you because I want to know your understanding of what a professional soccer player does during their downtime. We've established the Salt Bay connection here and the Salt Bay economy, obviously, to which they contribute. They are obviously getting very salty, high-quality beef at some point during their summer break or their break that they have from their seasons. What else are they getting up to, do you think, Taylor?
I think there's a few different things that they're getting up to when they are given time away, actual time away from their clubs. I think they are physically resting and recovering, and that can be maybe they're having medical procedures they put off. That's what Marcus Rashford is going to do. And there's other players who I think will wait to get stuff done, and then they have some time to recover and get kind of physically caught up. And that can even be as minute as reestablishing sleeping patterns. I read a little bit about that, about players will kind of use the offseason to reset to make sure that they're back on the right sleep schedule, because the season can be so disruptive and hard to find time to sleep. If you have a 8 p.m. kickoff and then you're getting home at midnight and you still have the adrenaline, it's tough to go to bed early. So finding ways to compensate for that seems to be part of it. Mentally recovering is another big one. And then having fun. And I have theories on why the having fun tends to be so extreme. And it's not just money, although that's a big part of it. But there is an element of you are asked to do very specific things in very specific ways for very long amounts of time. Go do whatever you want to do, and that tends to lead to alcohol and shenanigans.
Oh dear, alcohol and shenanigans. And talking about the sleep, by the way, Taylor, that's an intriguing part that I didn't even think about. I didn't think about how much a player's sleep is disrupted. I remember reading an article about Ronaldo, Cristiano Ronaldo, when he was at Real Madrid, and how he'd have those ice chamber baths after games. And sometimes he'd get home at 2 or 3 a.m. and he'd still do that because he has so much adrenaline after a game, particularly a late game, he just can't get to sleep. And speaking of Brandt Bronico, whom I quoted earlier, I was listening to him discuss playing on a different podcast where he says even after a regular sort of Saturday afternoon game, he's got so much adrenaline that he can't sleep until like 3 a.m. Going into Sunday morning, which I think is quite common among a lot of professionals. So he has to find ways to catch up on that sleep during the season as well, as do many other professionals. So it might be a facet of the off season that we don't often discuss. Joe, what are your thoughts on this about the off season and what players get up to? Keep it PG.
Yeah, so there's a lot of vacationing, and maybe that's not necessarily true for every player, but in terms of what we see publicly, there's a lot of vacationing. There's hanging out with family. There's also training, right? Players are still working and working to improve. I think of Christian Pulisic training with Eddie Johnson in 2018, and maybe he's done it since then. Either former pros that they're training with, or fellow professionals, and they're working to improve their game as a group. There's also this whole other. We've talked about the Salt Bay economy. There's this whole other ecosystem of players that's outside of this elite stratosphere, right? There's lower division players. In the United States, there's the NWSL, who are currently fighting, as they're approaching a collective bargaining agreement, the Players Association is fighting for more pay. And so there are players that don't make as much money that can't afford to just take the offseason off and go to Mykonos or Ibiza and play and vacation, whatever. There's a campaign going on right now in the NWSL by the Players Association called #NoMoreSideHustles. And they're doing this as they approach the CBA, as I mentioned. And it's a way to raise awareness for the fact that so many of their players, even high-level players and players that have been maybe even fringe national team, U.S. Women's national team players, have still very recently had to go and get one or two other jobs at times, in addition to raising children and different things like that maybe we don't even think about. The current minimum player salary for the 2021 NWSL season, the minimum is $22,000 and the maximum is $52,500. There are these players that are making $30,000 a year that are going and spending their offseason and even times during the season working other jobs. Jessica McDonald is a player who's featured for the U.S. Women's National Team before. She's played for the North Carolina Courage, just a phenomenal goal scorer in NWSL. She tweeted out that she's worked at Amazon packing boxes 10 hours a day, while she's still trying to maintain the lifestyle of being a professional athlete and all the mental challenges and physical work that goes into that. She'd pack boxes, she'd go to training, maybe she'd train other kids as well, and just so many other streams of income needed. So there is this alternate reality that's very real to a lot of people, but alternate to the elite stratosphere of professional players, where a lot of folks during the offseason are working their tails off, making money.
Wow. That was a facet I didn't even think about as well, Joe. Thank you for sharing that one. I also caught up with Brandt Bronico about this question, sort of asking what he does and what MLS professionals do during the downtime, whether they work out, where they go. And Brandt says usually MLS players will visit family and train with other pros in their hometowns or their former college programs to stay in shape and stay as sharp as they can. As far as vacation goes, says Brandt, usually everyone goes on one pretty close to when the season ends, but not more than 3 to 5 days. Being a professional, says Brandt, we have a responsibility to stay disciplined to the game we devote our lives to, so usually everyone comes back to the next preseason ready to go. And I found this really interesting, Graham, because I found an article on The Guardian from 2017 which said, back for preseason but no real break, how footballers' summers have changed. And this article, Graham, in The Guardian sort of talks about how many Premier League sides provide off-season training plans now. Apparently, Arsenal players actually demanded this some time a while ago. And this article follows Bournemouth and how the argument being that players now start pre-season for top-level players in better shape than how they ended it 15 years ago. And a Bournemouth player apparently once went on vacation with the fitness coach to keep up with things. And this article article saying that around half the squad at Bournemouth at this particular time, who were in the Premier League at the time, came in during their summer vacation, during their time off, for voluntary workouts. The thrust of this article being that modern players, they make far more high intensity runs. They need to be in peak conditioning. They can't afford to let it slide for even a matter of days, like they may have done in the past, Graham.
Yeah, and I think there is definitely that expectation now of certainly elite level players. I mean, you've seen the other kind of common thing you'll see is from elite players on their Instagrams or Twitter or social feeds is them posting pictures to kind of prove that they're keeping themselves fit. So I'm thinking of Jadon Sancho was posting pictures of him doing sprints on the beach, which, I don't know how much he's doing of that. It looks good, and it looks like he's getting ready to go at Manchester United after a big transfer. And everyone wants to avoid... Do you remember when Henrik Mkhitaryan came back one summer?
Yes.
And it looked like he had a shirt up his ball, a ball up his shirt. Sorry, when he took pre-season pictures. Was it at Manchester United or Arsenal? Can't remember. But yeah, you want to avoid doing that. And if you're a Bayern Munich player, you get swole when you're not when you're not playing. I mean, Leon Goretzka came out of lockdown last year like he'd got the Captain America procedure. And has anyone seen Donny van de Beek this season? Taylor,
No.
Have you seen van de Beek?
Good or bad? Has anyone?
He has Solskjaer. he's put on some muscle, some beef in a good way, not in the Mkhitaryan way. So
A new power cube, Graham?
Power cube squared.
There we go.
I did start, by the way, I don't know if I ever said this in our Euro coverage. I did start listing in my lineups that Xherdan Shaqiri was just Cube. I didn't even write his name anymore. I just wrote Cube. That makes me happy that Donny van de Beek has come back in physically fit and ready to go and chiseled. I think in watching the Leeds documentary, The Leeds All or Nothing, we learned that Marcelo Bielsa does very comprehensive weigh-ins and fat testing. And I think there are lots of obstacles put in place to make sure that aside from just wanting to look good on social media, players are definitely working very hard to not get yelled at as soon as they come back from training. Because unlike other sports, like baseball, there are all those stories about a player showing up 30 pounds overweight, and it's just sort of like, all right, well, we'll get you into shape for the season. I think it's sort of like you show up for preseason in good physical shape with good fitness, ready to improve that, not showing up to get your fitness up in time for the start of the season the way I think it probably used to be way back when.
I think the days of tales of players the first day of preseason, spewing their guts up, I think they're gone. At least at the elite level.
Yeah, I think as Brandt said, that this is the sport these players devote their lives to, and now more than ever, it's essential to be in peak fitness because that's what differentiates the game from what it was 15, 20 years ago. It's much more high intensity, so it's more important to come back to pre-season ready. And you mentioned Mkhitaryan, Graham. There were some photos of Neymar circulating on social media this week as well. A lot of body shaming going on for Neymar, which isn't so hot, but it did kind of raise the point that maybe he didn't appear to be in peak physical condition going into this league season, which, as I mentioned, does start this coming weekend as we record. So I think
I found my favorite one. I'm sending it to you all now, and I'll have to post it later. But the one that we haven't mentioned is Ilkay Gundogan, legendary status, showed up when he was still at Borussia Dortmund. There you go, fellas. You can check your WhatsApp for that one. But he showed up with some poundage, a little bit of chunk to him. I don't think he went the same way at Man City with Pep in charge. I feel like that would be a stronger reaction if he showed up with a bit of a belly on.
It's just extra bite in midfield, Taylor.
There we go. There we go. I mean, he had a few extra bites, which maybe gave him that extra bite. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. He certainly throws his weight around in the middle of the park, but not quite like in that picture you have sent around, Taylor. So I think we have discussed, we've covered off pretty well how long players get off and what they kind of do in their break time and the lack thereof. And it's very much a varying situation depending on the level of player that we're dealing with here. Maybe we can talk a little bit about pre-season, which is an essential part of this whole process as well, and what actually happens in pre-season and how pre-season might differ to the regular season in terms of getting back into condition. And obviously we know there are pre-season friendlies, as I've described. They've been since mid-July. Teams have been doing those, top teams as well. And reading that article, Taylor, on The Guardian, the one that referred to Bournemouth, once again, it's called Back for Pre-Season But No Real Break, How Footballers' Summer's Changed. I recommend listeners check that one out. It explains how they were doing body fat measurements upon their return, and they are very much checking up on these players. Yep. They're not wearing those little vests with the GPS in them all summer long, so I guess they have to sort of check in with them when they come back in. And I've actually got a note from Brandt here. Brandt, thank you so much for contributing so much to this podcast. I feel like you should be on it with us here. But I asked him how pre-season training differs for MLS and in his experience as well. And he says in MLS pre-season training consists of multiple training sessions and strength sessions per day. There are not too many days off, and teams usually pick one or two places, warmer places like Florida or Arizona, shout out to you, Joe, to stay for 2 to 3 weeks so players can focus on pre-season with no distractions and play against other MLS teams. It's a lot on the body, but the focus is ultimately to prepare you so you can stay healthy for the duration of the season. Brandt, thank you very much for that. That's a very interesting perspective, and I know that kind of thing in MLS, that's sort of mid-January when I think those camps kind of start up, is my understanding. Taylor, what's your thought on pre-seasons and how they go down?
I mean, I think they go down aggressively, frighteningly, intimidatingly at first would be my assumption, because if you're showing up and there are those weigh-ins and there are those fitness tests, and I remember in college we had to run 2 miles in 12 minutes and we had to do the beep test, and if you didn't do that, then you couldn't play until you did.
On. In college? Like
yes.
For the rec team? For what?
No, I played 1 year of college ball. I mean, I sat on the bench for 1 year of college, basically. But yes, when I showed up thinking I was the man from being so good in high school and big fish, small pond sort of situation, thinking I didn't really need to do that much physical exercise and didn't need to be in the best possible shape, I was wrong, emphatically so. And maybe that's a good way to continue it, which is that if you do show up not in the best shape, not ready to go, that puts you back, because they will probably, if there are tests you have to pass, then you have to work until you can pass those tests, which means a lot of running and a lot of cardio and a lot of work in the gym. But then you are behind, and you're the player who showed up late that isn't ready to go, and other players then are in training before you are and are getting those minutes, and you can fall really quickly out of a manager's estimations if you haven't come in ready to go. And I think that intensifies the pressure that these players are already under. And it's especially the case when, as we've talked about, like Paul Pogba, not back in training yet. So you can have Man United Academy players or maybe a new signing coming in who could theoretically have some really good performances and jump into that spot. But then when Pogba comes back in, and it's sort of like, all right, well, that's his. You did great, but now what are you going to do next? Like, you have to continue to perform and improve in a way that keeps you in contention and doesn't kind of completely physically destroy you. And I think it makes it really difficult and really challenging, because we've always seen players, Julian Green for Bayern Munich, scoring goals in preseason, and we all thought, like, all right, he's staying with Bayern this season, it's going to be his breakthrough year, and they immediately loaned him, because even with all that said, preseason still doesn't necessarily mean that much for the way the overall season's going to go.
Joe, are the streets of Phoenix, Arizona littered with MLS players struggling to get back into shape at certain times of year?
Phoenix and Tucson both, because there's often MLS preseason games down in Tucson, and so it is a bit of a hub for players. I haven't seen a lot of them doing bear crawls up and down the highway here.
How about eating bear claws?
Not that either, although that sounds quite nice. A lot better
What's a
than
bear
what
crawl?
I said. It's like the elbow over elbow. You're on the ground, kind of in a plank position,
when you
and
crawl
you're
like a
moving
bear.
forward. Yeah, it's sort of that vision that Graham just gave you.
I thought bears walked along like Yogi with picnic baskets. Sorry, continue.
You're right. My bad. You're right. One thing I wanted to add for this preseason discussion is, from a tactical standpoint and from a training session standpoint, there is a lot of the physical work, but preseason is also the time for players to be fed a lot of information from coaches, and good coaches can simplify it and translate it to their players and really communicate that effectively. But from different environments that I've been around at a professional level, not playing, but observing more so than anything, it's a chance for coaches to communicate to their players what they want them to be doing in all the different phases of play. So in possession, in a defensive block, high pressing, it would fall into that category as well. Attacking transition, so counterattacks, and then counter pressing, which is defensive transition. It's a chance for them to work on those things on a more macro level and really communicate the principles of play And then as preseason continues and they get games in, they can narrow it down and get more specific and work on different phases that way. And then once the season starts, hopefully they'll have a general idea of how they should be playing under the manager, and then they can work on just cleaning up little things throughout the season, game planning for specific opponents, sharpening things up, things like that. So preseason, in addition to all the strength and fitness things, it's also a really important tactical time for managers to get their ideas across to their players.
Definitely, and that feeds into the idea of players who move clubs as well, Joe. It's very important for them to get on board with the tactics. I imagine if you move to a Maurizio Sarri team, you've got to get used to doing things differently and for inhaling lots of cigarette smoke simultaneously. Speaking of cigarette smoke, Graham, Wayne Rooney sort of famously used to come to pre-season and maybe the first few games of the season not quite looking at his peak. What's your understanding of the pre-season training?
Yeah, well, now Wayne Rooney just comes to pre-season and crunches
youth players.
And rules them out for 3 months, sidelines them for 3 months. I mean, I think Taylor and Joe have kind of covered. I was going to mention the more the tactical side of things, where I read recently. I seem to be referencing Manchester United a lot in this podcast, but I was
it's fine.
Reading that you're okay with that, Taylor.
I am.
I was reading that Solskjaer is planning on moving his team into a 4-3-3, which is different to what was the case last season and maybe even the season before that. And so that's going to require quite a lot of tactical work. And given particularly last season where we had a congested fixture schedule and there wasn't a lot of time to work on tactics or game plans or anything of that sort of kind on the training pitch, it feels like this pre-season in particular, 2021 pre-season, is really important for managers to get their ideas across. And basically what Joe was talking about.
What Joe was talking about is always the best way to consider these podcasts, I find. He is the fountain of knowledge, after all. Gents, I think I'm pretty satisfied with us answering this question. The one facet I was going to talk about is payment. I saw some questions about whether players actually get paid during the off-season. And excluding Joe's example of the unfortunate players who had to take part-time jobs elsewhere, yes, professional players generally are paid all year long, like a regular employee would be. Taylor, are you satisfied at this point, sir?
I am. I would like to say one thing about, in terms of being satisfied, one thing maybe we could all remember. Harry Maguire is the one that stands out of people having a few too many and maybe not being a great representative of England abroad, although in some ways that is an accurate representation of England abroad.
TSS lawyers are on standby, by the way, Taylor.
But I think what I realized, and I wouldn't go fully with this analogy, but in a lot of ways there are parallels between top tier professional footballers and people who have chosen a career in the military. Obviously, a career in the military is going to put you at much more risk, but you kind of forfeit control of a lot of the aspects of your life, that you have people telling you how to sleep and when to sleep and what to eat and how to eat and where you can go and what you can't do and when you have time off, and you are under control all the time, and you're always being coached and instructed and adjusted, and hey, you didn't do this, we're monitoring your sleep, you slept 5 minutes later, you were on your phone. There's so many aspects of things that are controlled that essentially, think of it as a soldier being given leave. That's what you're doing, except it's a 21-year-old with millions of dollars. They are absolutely going to go out and blow off some steam and sort of do whatever they want, what you would do if you were 21 with millions of dollars and you finally didn't have people looking over you. It's what a lot of people do when they go to college, except in this case, the college would sort of be continuing to enforce the rules. And so it's players basically who haven't had a ton of personal freedom. A lot of guys who had been living with their parents until they became professional athletes are now given this opportunity. And so it's easy to criticize them when they're drunk and maybe misbehaving. And I think Harry Maguire, again, is the one that maybe takes it too far. But there was the clip of Kyle Walker, I believe, in Mykonos, and he was visibly drunk, and people were kind of frustrated by that. But it's a guy who just played in the Euro final, has a whole season ahead of him, has a whole season behind him. I forgive him for having a few drinks and enjoying himself.
I forgive him. I'm visibly drunk right now.
There we go.
Graham, any more on this one?
No, just it's exactly what Taylor was saying there. I don't like the a lot of the criticism that players face in their in the off season for having a bit of fun. They literally get, at least at the elite level, they get a week in a whole year to do whatever they want. So I say let them do what they want. And as I kind of referenced earlier, that downtime plays an important role in the mental side of things as well. Just having that downtime, not focusing on high pressure environments. That's what they're facing on a week to week basis. So not having that for a week or two is good for their athletic well-being as well.
Yeah, that's a very important point to note as well, Graham. Any more important points from you, Joseph Lowery?
Oh, I'm all important pointed out, Ryan Bailey.
Oh, well, that means it's the time we must conclude this episode of Soccer 101. Thank you very much, gents, for your contributions. Thank you, listener, for doing that listening thing that you do. We'll be back with you shortly. Thank you very much. Bye!